today by Don Taylor of Pointy Head Press, who is our bookbinder, who comes in once a week and repairs books that have been damaged. So usually we kind of leave a pile of books for you to repair, and I was thinking we could take it to your repair table.
Yeah.
And then you can take me through the process of how you identify what needs to be fixed, what can you do in today's sitting versus what needs to be put off, and how to set up your repair shop.
Okay. All right. Well, then let me grab a few of these, and then these are there's a couple of new ones here. We can have a look at them. And then these are some stuff I've been working on. This one and this one. Yeah, these are all interesting, so I can bring them all over.
I brought with me this introductory kind of bookbinding 101 box, and I was hoping we can go through some of the items in here, and you can tell me whether it's a yay or a nay for you.
Okay,
so,
sure.
The first thing that comes with the bookbinding kit is a set of needles, and we have a thinner one, much thicker ones, and then curved needles.
Okay.
So what is the point of a curved needle?
Well, curved needles are particularly useful when you're doing so-called Coptic sewing. That's a form of binding, an early form of binding, where you're actually you need the needle to sort of curve in and out of the text, so that you can keep because you're continually wrapping your thread around the previous sewing. So that's what makes a curved needle useful. If you're looking at this selection of needles, most of these are not suitable for bookbinding, because if you look at the eye of these needles, they're very big, and also of course they're quite large shafts on the needles as well, and that will tend to make your holes very large, and that loosens up your sewing. You don't want your sewing to be loose and sloppy. So the bigger the hole and the bigger the eye, then the less tight your sewing is going to be.
But how can you know in advance? Like, for example, some of this thread is pretty darn thick, and it's also been waxed. So it's like, I know that this won't fit through a regular needle.
Well, yeah, there are bookbinding needles that would take it. There's the number 18 bookbinding needle.
Okay.
that will take it beautifully. However, it has to be said that this is a pretty heavy thread for bookbinding, so you wouldn't use that a great deal. But yeah, this is a pretty heavy. You could use it for a big heavy book that's got big fat pages that will kind of disguise the thickness of the thread. And what you don't want to do is build up your swell. When you're putting your book together in signatures in these folded sections, and you run your thread down and back and down and back and down and back, you'll end up building up a certain amount of swell because of the thickness of the thread. And you put something like this in for 40 signatures, and you'll have a big load of swell on your spine, which you don't really want. You don't need it, and you don't really want it. So it wouldn't normally be colored.
Right.
And also normally it wouldn't be pre-waxed.
Oh.
No.
You have to do like on the...
You would wax your own thread if you wanted to, and the debate rages about that, about waxed or unwaxed thread. Some people, conservators, are kind of down on wax now. They don't want you to wax your thread because because wax is a chemical, and you're adding a chemical. The nice thing about waxing your thread is that it protects the thread as it slides through the paper.
So the other question I have is about the bone folders.
Yes.
So this is something that showed up in the box.
Yeah.
And I know that this is used for kind of like when you bend the paper to...
Yes.
To do... Why a bone folder and not anything else? Like, can you use your hands? Can you use a ruler?
Well, bone is, this is a plastic one, by the way. This is a bone folder, and also they're making them out of Teflon now, because Teflon doesn't. It's very low friction on the paper. It tends to not burnish the paper. You don't particularly want that. So you don't have a Teflon folder here. These two, I think this one's plastic, and this is bone. The nice thing about bone was that you could shine it up, you could make it very smooth, and that would glide over your paper and not snag anything.
And then for the awl, I put a little
Yeah.
eraser here, so I don't poke myself. But the awl is only for leather and for the page holes, like where you would sew.
Yes, that all would be. It's a bit heavy if you're going to be punching holes for sewing your book with this. Then you need to stay right out near the tip. You know, you don't want to be pushing the hole all through. But because this again creates a big hole, and you don't want that. So this all is okay for piercing, you know, board or whatever. But typically, a needle, so-called needle awl, is better, where you're actually inserting a needle into a shaft and using that to create a small hole.
Now that we've assessed kind of a bookbinding 101, how many of these tools do you actually use, like
Well,
as a professional?
I use bone folders all the time. Awls occasion, you know, awls, yes, sometimes. You use an awl for punching holes in your sections before you're sewing. I certainly use needles. What else have you got in here? Yeah,
I don't know, these needles came with it.
oh yeah, let's see, they might be better, who knows. Yeah, these are already, you can tell, these are slenderer. There's another big fat needle. That's no good. Yeah, these are better. They're still pretty heavy. These two are okay. They're more like a darning needle than a bookbinding needle, because the eye is still pretty big.
Right.
So that's the thing. There are places to buy proper bookbinding needles for that purpose.
So my next question is, how is bookbinding different from book repair? Because I know you do both of them, and I recently asked you to look for a book that I want to feature in a future video.
Oh yes.
And you picked it off the shelf like that because you recognized your work on the spine. So I'm wondering, like, how can you tell? Can you just show us?
This book, like many books of its period, 18th century, something like that.
Yeah.
One of the features of those bindings is that it's a leather, very frequently, almost always, a leather binding. So leather, in this case, leather, calf leather on the spine and on the corners, and the rest is covered in a sort of decorated paper. So that's very common. The other very common thing is that the leather has been bonded right down hard onto the folds of the signatures. So the book is the sewn book is you know it's got all of its signatures, it's, you know, organized here, and the leather is glued right down to it. And that was called a flexible binding because the spine flexes, but of course that damages stuff like the tooling, and eventually damages the gold tooling and so on. So eventually people moved away, for the most part, from so-called flexible bindings. The problem with repairing it is how do you get in under when the hinges break, and which is always what happens. How do you fix that? If you know what you're doing, you can get in under here with a scalpel or a lifting knife and lift up your leather here. But you really can't get in under here because you'll just chip away chunks of the spine leather. One solution that has been developed is to use Japanese paper of a suitable color, and you treat the Japanese paper to make it you know, put more of a surface on it, and with wax and so on.
Did you use a very special kind of glue, or?
In the case of this, you use a reversible PVA. There's one called Jade 403 that people use. Kind of size your Japanese paper to make it more durable, and then simply apply it to the outside of your hinge, and run it over a little bit onto the spine and a little bit onto the board.
Right.
And that will give you a reasonably good repair. It's not suitable for, you know, heavy use, but in terms of certainly library collections and that kind of stuff, it's actually very satisfactory. Inside, you would also fix the board on with in this case a cloth hinge, or you could use more Japanese paper to create a hinge on the inside. So it's being held from both inside and out.
How long would a process like this take?
Not tremendously long. Usually, I'm just thinking about what the recommended sort of charging rate is for one of these kind of hinges, and Typically, you'd be looking at maybe an hour or less per hinge.
And then you would have to wait for the glue to dry. Would that take longer than an hour, maybe?
Oh yeah, you have to let the stuff dry. The glue dries pretty quickly. Put it off to the side and let it dry overnight or whatever, just so that there's no question that it's dry.
So you've made this from scratch. This is your notebook. It has your name on the back here,
Right.
Don Taylor Bookbinder.
Yes, I'm afraid it does. Yes.
So can you talk to me about the difference between repairing an old, already bound book and making something from scratch, and kind of the differences in terms of the tools you use? Or
Okay. Generally, making a new book, such as this one, is much simpler. It's a much simpler process. You start with all nice, new, clean materials. You don't have to worry about, the paper's fragile or the leather's fragile. All those things are worrisome sometimes with old books. In a new book, you've got nice new paper. You fold it up, and you create signatures, and then you sew the signatures together. You add some end papers. This one has a little pocket at the back, and then I used a very ordinary, not fancy leather to cover these. This is a cowhide. So you can make a coat out of this kind of leather. It's durable, but it's not real bookbinding leather. So but it's perfectly okay for this kind of purpose. And then the actual structure. So the structure is simple on the inside, and then the actual binding is very simple. There's two boards, front and back, and you have a little spine stiffener in here, and you allow enough room in your hinges, and boom, stick it in. You stick it all together with your end papers and a bit of mull.
so when you would make these, would you set up a bunch, kind of, I don't want to say factory style?
Yeah,
but
typically, yeah, I probably do. I haven't really made any of these for a little while, but making maybe 10 at once or something like that. Here's something, speaking of sewing, this one, I haven't re-sewed it all, but I have attached new tapes to the spine, and just running them across, and that allows me to, see, I've even got a needle threaded and ready to go here. Yeah, here it is. These signatures here, these three, have to be sewn back on to the body of the book. And they will be, so the needle will go in to the inside of the signature. You find the middle fold. Usually there's at least 2 or 3 or 4, very frequently 4 folds nested one inside the other. And you'd put your needle inside and then come out, a hole here, and then come out here, go around the tape, go back in, and then back out and around and so on, all the way down, and go into the next signature, back the other way.
wow, so you would have to do this for every single signature?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in the case of this one, only a few at the front and back needed to have that happen. But in the normal course of sewing a book from scratch, you would do that for each signature.
How long would sewing a whole book with like all the individual signatures take? Because it seems pretty tedious.
Well, I wouldn't say tedious. Let's not go there. But it does take a while, and can be quite difficult. It can be very simple to sew your little blue book. Very simple to sew this one. Somewhat more elaborate. There's structures where you're sewing on 2 cords, and you've got to come out between the cords and do a figure 8 around the cord and back in. I mean, it's quite a time-consuming affair. But that's if you're trying to duplicate a, sort of Byzantine or kind of Gothic sort of binding from that kind of period. So that's a little unusual, but that does take a long time. To sew a book like this on, say, these tapes, and say I had a whole bunch of, this was all just loose signatures now, and I was going to sew it, I would want to probably do it in about 2 hours. Typically, you would allow about 5 minutes per thing because you're fiddling around with it, trying to keep it in position. And
would you say sewing takes up more time than gluing and filling in gaps?
Well, I don't. But the truth is, I don't have to sew most of the books that are here. most of the books that are here, the sewing is more or less okay. You might, a lot of times you're going to have maybe one or two signatures up at the front, you know, because that's where all the wear and tear frequently is. What would be the main time consumer? Working with the hinges, trying to, you know, repairing hinges. That's a goodly part of the job. The process is very integrated. You know, you've got these things all, one depends on the other, you know.
Dawn, if a young person was considering taking up bookbinding as a career, what skills do you think they would need to have before they start learning? Like, I'm guessing patience is definitely one of them.
Oh, it doesn't hurt. Yeah, right. Real basic stuff like good hand-eye coordination, you know, kind of attention to detail, you know, that sort of stuff. I've had many students over the years, and some are, you know, you could say, oh yeah, that person is much better suited for this kind of work than, say, others, because of their you know, their care in their work. You can't really do a lot of shortcutting. You can't speed it up too much, you know, otherwise. I mean, the industry, of course, has tried over the years to speed up bookbinding, and they've done a fantastic job, right? They've got it so now that you can make a book in, you know, you can put a book together in a few seconds. You know, it's kind of ridiculous. You know, you just throw it in a machine and it goes boom and squirts out a book at the other end. But that's not what anybody really wants to learn. You know, I mean, anybody can learn how to run a machine, but that's not why you would get into this kind of work at all.
What's the worst thing that could happen if you're not careful? Like, you could actually end up destroying a rare book that's a unique artifact.
Yeah, you could. You know, you have to be careful with your use of adhesives so that you're using the right adhesive so that it can be reversed, you know, down the line. If your repair breaks down and it has to be fixed again, can that person 30 years or 50 years from now, you know, not have to, I mean, this, if you recall this little book here, this board was attached with a glob of like a line of PVA, you know, white glue down the thing, and it luckily it just peeled right off, so fair enough. But if it had stuck hard, it would have been very damaging to get it off the body of the book.
So I know in conservation work they want to make it so that the repairs you do can be obvious that you've done repair work on it.
For example, this poor old thing, it has a great big hunk of leather torn away from the cover, and on the back too there's a big chunk and over the spine. Something has either eaten that, or, and I believe that's probably what's happened here, a rat or something has had supper on this book. And of course the leather itself is very deteriorated. So you know, if you were thinking from a conservation point of view, you'd probably go, okay, I'll make a box for it, you know, and
right,
that'll keep it, you know, safe. If you were a collector, for example, or a book dealer, and you're trying to resell it, you really can't sell it like this, probably not as readily. So,
or for a lot less.
Yeah, oh, big time. And so what you might do, you might hire somebody like me to fix this and add new leather in here, you know, and make it look much more presentable. But that's not conservation work. That's restoration work, and it's quite different and quite a lot more interventive. You know, you're really getting, you know, sort of messing with it by comparison.
And last question I'm going to ask about general kind of bookbinding is, what's the most difficult project you've ever worked on, and what was difficult about it?
So I think I have one in mind that I can tell you about. This was a vellum manuscript from, I believe, I'm trying to remember, I think it was 14th century, and it was an Italian manuscript from that period, monastic, so produced in a monastery. It was Gospel of St. John with commentaries. So the book was easily 12 inches wide and maybe 14 or 15 inches tall and 2 or 3 inches thick. So quite a big book. It had been bound in leather over wooden boards. This was before well, it was before paper was invented, or it was in common use at least for this, because it was the actual pages were vellum instead of paper, and so instead of cardboard for covers with leather over them, it was wood, and that was certainly what was used before cardboard or pasteboard was invented. So this book had been wrapped up in newspaper apparently, and buried in the ground in northern Italy, where it's very wet, and it was put there to prevent it from being looted during the Second World War. So it had survived pretty well until 1940 or something, and then it got buried in the ground in a wet place, wrapped up in newspaper. And it was unearthed eventually after the war, and of course it was badly damaged. The water had soaked into it, and a lot of the writing was obliterated. And the vellum, if you've ever handled vellum, or if you know anything about it, it's very subject to, it's very affected by water. So if it gets wet, it curls madly, really, really badly. And so this book was, the actual covers were broken. The boards were snapped in half. The leather was completely toast on the outside. It was old leather. I mean, it was from that period. So the leather had become soaked, and old leather tends when it gets wet, it just turns into crispy. Nothing. It doesn't even resemble leather anymore. So this was like that. The cover had to be taken off, and the book had to be taken apart. And each fold of, say, 100 or 200 folds of vellum, this size, once they were folded open, and they were all very badly crinkled, and they had to be dampened again, and then allowed to dry in a way that would make them flat. So that was a huge challenge, and it took a long time. I couldn't work on it constantly because it occupied a certain part of the bindery for months. I would do a few, and do almost every day. I'd do one, and then put it in the stack with the other ones to try and keep it all flat. There was no saving the binding. The binding was, the materials were absolutely degraded. We kept them, but I had to rebind it in new materials. So that was hard. It took months and months and months.
You mentioned that you like to work on a few projects at a time so that you could let things dry and then move on to the next thing. Like you have that cover working over there.
Yep.
So today, this book is new. How do you assess something like firsthand? Just got it and you're looking at it. Like, what are you thinking?
What am I seeing? Well, it's mostly what I'm seeing, and this is ready to come off, and this is already off. There we go. So I would pop that off, and save them, and then let's have a look at what happens when we open it up. Are the boards still attached? Well, they are. The paper hinge. This is originally one sheet of paper. It's attached here. There's the fly leaf. And then the other half of it would go up over the hinge and then down onto the board. That internal hinge, you can see it in the light. You can see light coming through it. That's, of course, broken. And the good thing is that the outside attachments are still holding. And this book would have probably been sewn on, let's see if we can find, there. This book was sewn on cords. So the cords, like this one here, where the tapes are used to sew as a support, these books, and before tapes were introduced in this way, cord was used. And in the case of this one, underneath this layer of paper here, probably you'd see remains of the cord. It's flat there, so that meant that somebody took a saw and cut into the spine like that, and then the sewing would go out of that hole, come around the cord, go back in the same hole, and carry on down the thing. So that allowed for the extra cord to be laced onto the board.
So now what do you?
What am I going to do now?
Yeah.
Let's look at the back. Oh no! See, the back you can actually, if you want to focus in here, you can see that there's a cord, right? You can see it right there, that little stub of that little, and then there's another one here. So it was clearly sewn on, I guess, 3 cords. There's a little bit of evidence of one there. There's right, that one there, it's still attached slightly. So it's ready to come off. So that what we'll have to do is reattach the boards. And depending on how elaborate we want to do it, in this case, the boards are still holding. There's ways of reattaching. One of them is to simply put, a new hinge of paper in here, of Japanese paper in here. Put more on the outside. Ideally, what you would want to do is get in here with your knife, lift up this leather a little bit, cut a piece of leather of new calf. This is calf. Cut a piece of new calf, remove this particle of the spine, and sort of rebuild the spine. So you're going to put in a new stiffener here, like a bit of light card or something.
Yeah.
And then the new leather would go over that, underneath the new leather, or the old leather, sorry. And then that sort of gets buried there. And then you can, and in the end, you can reattach these over top of the new leather.
And you would attach it with the same adhesive you mentioned before?
Typically, you would use paste for this kind of work, because paste is paste is not plastic. Paste is a cellulose adhesive, so made out of starch. The white glue is plastic, of course, and so those are trickier because they aren't necessarily as reversible. There are a couple that are reversible. Historically, you would use paste to reattach these things, and you'd have to be quite careful not to let the dampness from the paste soak through the leather, because that will ruin the leather if it happens. Need a little pair of scissors.
This is a Teflon bone folder. Would you still call it a bone folder if it's not made out of bone?
Well, it's called a folder.
Okay.
So
that's fair. I guess
okay.
I've always just known bone folder.
I remember asking a class to bring bone folders if they had them. One lady brought in a bone-colored file folder.
Aww.
And I thought, okay, never mind. It's okay, don't worry.
That's actually kind of a cute mistake.
Yeah, it was funny. She couldn't figure out why I wanted it, but anyway. This paste. I use this. It's very strong. It's made out of rice flour, or rice starch, and it's one of the cellulose adhesives. So it's reversible as opposed to.
So this is rice paste.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's called sticking paste, and it says made in Japan. Where would you get something like this?
Get it at the paper place on Queen Street. Like above ground, they decided to, sell to the bookbinding community, so they have the right needles, they have the right folders, they have the paste, a few other things. Even they don't have a ton of stuff, but they'll sell you cloth for covering books, that kind of stuff.
And like if you're less local?
Yeah, there's a guy out there named George Hill, and he does online, and you can order from him, and I do. He's very good. We'll just start with these few things. So I'm going to put these things somewhere safe. This book isn't in terrible condition, believe it or not. The structure is still intact. The only thing is that this back board is ready to pop off. So I think what we can do is we can have a look in here. I think probably there it just popped off. So that's what you're expecting to have happen. We'll try and keep the other one from popping off. This is the fly leaf, and it can just be peeled out of there and temporarily. There it goes. And you can scrape off some of the bits of old paper and old glue and stuff. You can see that it's not the ink so much as there's I think it's the acid in the paper or something. I don't know exactly what's causing that. It's not the ink, I don't think, but it's reacting with the ink. When was this? 1813. So this is handmade paper. Anything before 1840 is pretty much handmade paper. If it were raggedy, you know, with old bits of leather and stuff, I would sand that a little bit. Just to get rid of those little tags of stuff there. They're not any use anymore. And what I'm going to do is put down, I'm going to find the right Japanese paper. This may take a second. But I'm going to rake around in here. Yeah, it's pretty good color. And this is a strong Japanese paper. Natural color, of course. Yeah, it's a little bit lighter, but it's not going to show very much, so I think I'll go with that. And so I'm going to cut myself, typically I would tear it. So I'm going to cut, I've put in this hinge. Originally I cut the thing, and I thought, no, get something that matches the end paper. So that's going to go like that, and that's going to give us our attachment for our board.
After you use the brushes with the glue or the paste, do you need to use anything special to clean them?
No, just water. The glues are all water soluble. Here, I'm just going to drag that there like that, so it's in the right place for the hinge. That's going to go down there like that and be attached by that bit. But it's a bit wide, doesn't need to be that wide, so I'm going to trim that a little bit. Yeah, so I've attached that with the Japanese paper on the inside, right? And you do that first before you do anything on the outside. So now on the outside, I'm going to have to reattach these pieces.
So would you need more Japanese paper?
Yeah, I think I'm going to put Japanese paper over the whole back, but I've got to cut a new spine stiffener. The spine stiffener is just a strip of card. It's going to go on there to create a hollow, so there'll be an air space in here, and this is going to go down, and then the Japanese paper will go across there. Well, sometimes the sound aspect is a nice one. You know, you've got the sound of the needle and thread going through the paper can be quite nice. Cut the paper so that it doesn't obscure the gold tooling. Okay. I'm gonna cover the whole part that might show. I'm going to put some Clucel G on the paper. It's sort of a sizing agent. It actually is used for consolidating powdery leather. Useful properties.
So now that you've glued this on, you're just going to wait.
I'm going to wait until it dries, and then I'll turn the edges probably next time.
Okay.
Because right now it's a bit fragile.
And then you cut these off today or when it dries?
This stuff I'll just let that dry like that until next week.
And then what are you adding?
And then I'll turn them. I'll turn them in a little bit, and then that'll finish them off. Yeah.
And it will look like one of those professionally sewn fans, right?
Well, it'll put a new head cap, so-called, back on top there. I'll turn that inside because there's a little an air space there, a hollow.
And what are you adding now?
This is called Clucel G. It's you can smell the alcohol in it. It's a powdered cellulose, I think, that you mix with 100% or 99% alcohol. And so you're not adding water, because you don't want to add water to old leather, because it destroys it, makes it go crispy and brittle. I don't know.
And then this would go on next week as well after it dries?
So I'll put those aside somewhere safe, and then they'll go on later. And for that we use you glue them on, and then you wrap a tensor bandage around the spine all the way around several times.
Like a patient.
Yeah, very much so, and that makes it hug to the spine, and that doesn't take very long. The alcohol will evaporate off pretty quickly.
Now earlier I saw you scraping something here, like from these.
Oh yeah, I was trying to get, that's the old spine stiffener, and it's acidic, and it is. Oh yeah, while I'm at it, I should put some Klucel G on this stuff here.
So if you scrape it away, it gets rid of.
Well, it also, it's acidic the leather's acidic too, but it also it's adds thickness and stiffness, and so the leather is, in addition to being kind of fragile and brittle, it's also kind of inflexible because of this, and so if you can get it off without messing up the leather too much, then you can seal it up on the other side with more of this stuff, and that just allows you to make a closer bond onto the spine.
Thank you all very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in our next video, and I will link down below all of the resources that we've mentioned here in this video, as well as Dawn's webpage. So thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.